this is the first example that we are going to take for training ourselves regarding the tactical possibilities. Okay, so now coming to this position first, let's analyze the main weakness. Okay, the weakness is the white king. It's completely open, uh, and there are no squares left for the white king to go. Now, after we have analyzed, okay, the knights have controlled all the squares. Now let's analyze all the key candidate moves. Now, by the word candidate moves, I mean to say all the possibilities. So yeah, we can take the rook. Okay, that is we can take the knight. Sorry, that is what is happening. That is just very simple. But then the queen is going to take. And what is the motive behind this? Like, there's only one motive, that we have to reduce the amount of pieces surrounding the white king, so that they may not participate in the defense. Now, before sacrificing any piece, we must always ask that, is that piece actually important in the defense? Now, first of all, this is not a bad move, but it is not a good move either, because after rook captures on f4, there is nothing that we are doing to improvise our attack. Okay, so rather than analyzing any move of such, we must analyze, let's say, potential checks in this particular position. So yeah, one of the check is knight f2, which is not that beneficial because rook f2, and then the attack remains the same. And the second check that we see is queen to h4. Now, okay, this is one of the main thing that we have come forward with. Now, queen of h4 is one of the move which is actually possible and which is worth considering it, because yeah, the h4 square is not guarded. We can go queen h4. Okay, the king cannot escape. There is only one move, that is the knight coming back to h3. Now, once the knight comes back to h3, what else can we do? So we can see that, okay, these all squares are very weak, all the dark squares are weak. So yeah, probably we can exploit some of the dark squares. So let's start with this line, queen h4 check, knight h3. And now let's see that, okay, now what are the possible moves again? Yeah, I mean, the dark squares are weak. We can take the control of the dark squares, but how do we exactly take? Now, knight f2 fails to rook f2 again, so that is not what we can do. But if we closely observe this position, this h2 square, g3 square is somewhere where we can place our queen, something like this. And it's completely unavoidable because both the knights are guarding the h2 squares, and that means that if queen g3, it's almost game over, right? So queen g3, we go with the plan again. Now, yeah, queen f4, and this is where, your opponent will also try some last moves that he can do. Let's say if you're playing a bullet game, then this may have a good impact over your opponent, because we tend to play queen h2 check directly without seeing that, okay, if it's defended or not. But in case of any other uh, game, or even in bullet games also, if we see it properly, simple rook captures on f4, and now this mate is inevitable. So this is how we have to proceed while solving each and every puzzle. First of all, we saw that, okay, the white king is weak. Then we proceeded with a check. Then we went with queen h4 check. He went knight to h3. That is what he is going for. And then we can see that, okay, now the dark squares are weak. So maybe we can place our queen on h2. So we look for the plan. Okay, queen g3 is a potential move. We go for queen g3. And after queen f4, we just take the queen. That's a simple move that we have. b4 is just, I mean, it's complete nuisance because queen is to the checkmate anyhow. So yeah, I'm sure that this is clear. And also one more thing that is very important to keep in mind, that a lot of time eliminating the knight first helps. But in this case, it is not going to help, because the queen, after coming to f4, is going to keep guarding the h2 square, which is the main reason we are going with the check first, and then we are going for the simple queen g3 idea without sacrificing any material. So there is a saying in a lot of middle game puzzles that always sacrifice is a good solution, but sometimes taking the positional aspect into consideration is much more good idea. Like queen h4, we just saw that, okay, the position is completely hopeless because of this vacant squares, and we can just take advantage over it. So that is how it made our job real easy. And after queen g3, queen f4 is the only point that is worth playing, because everything else, there are just two attackers. You take this f3 knight, it's not going to work, because still queen h3 is going to be a checkmate. So yeah, and after queen f4, rook f4, pawn to b4, and now simple queen to h2 checkmate. So yes, this was a very nice one. Now proceeding to the next puzzle in this course that I'm going to cover is this one. It's white to play and we have to win the match. So it's really important to analyze the position here because the three things that we took in mind at the start of the course were that weakness and possible moves and then tactical aspects. So the weakness is clearly visible. I mean, the diagonal is weak, so queen h5 is a candidate move that we can go for. The second thing is that, yeah, the knight is participating in the attack. This knight is ready to jump in with nd5, but we should time it right. Now we see the correct move order or the tactical variation. So if queen h5 check, king f8, we have a queen f7 checkmate. That's just game over. And after queen h5 check, if king to e7, yeah, we have knight d5, but then the king escapes on d6. So that means that that particular variation is not working. That means that after queen h5, king e7, we have to think for something else. So which is the other candidate move possible except knight d5? So except for this move, the other move that is possible is actually queen to f7 check. So we must look for queen to f7 check. The king is under attack, so the king has to go run on d6. And now what we have to look for is that yes, the king can be attacked by the knight with knight to b5. Sorry, that's not b5, that's b5, knight to b5. But why knight to b5 is very important. So let's first start with queen h5, king e7, queen f7, king d6, and knight to b5 now is very important because c6 was not available for the black king, but c7 is the key escape square for the black king. So we go with knight b5 check. Now c7 was controlled, and after king d5, it's very important to analyze that c4 check is not checkmate because of king to e4. And although after king to e4, bishop g2 is still a checkmate, but you know, if we have a checkmate in one, then why to go for a checkmate in two? So we have a simple bishop g2 checkmate, and you see this king, all the squares. Now the queen is not even participating in the checkmate idea, but the knight is controlling this square. This knight is controlling c6. The bishop is checking over that diagonal, and of course there is nothing for this king. So again, let's come back to the original question. First, we identified the weakness. We went for queen h5 check, king to e7, and then we went for queen to f7 with a check, king to d6, and now simple knight to b5, king to d5, and now we notice that okay, all the squares are under control. There is nothing. There is the only move which is left is to avoid king to e4 and check the black king. That means bishop to g2 is the best candidate move that we can choose. So yeah, that was the solution to this puzzle. Let's proceed on to the next one. Yeah, this is black to play, and it's a really important thing that we have to keep in mind while we are uh, solving such kinds of puzzle whereby our queen is not participating at all. So when our queen is outside of the gameplay, it's very important to coordinate the pieces. For example, the knight and the two bishops are well coordinated enough to prove fatal for the white king. So if you see, the bishop on a6 is actually controlling e2 and f1. So that's just more than enough for us. Now, apart from this, the bishop on h4 is controlling f2 and e1. That means if there is a check on the king, then it's going to be a checkmate, more or less. So we analyze, okay, knight c3 is a candidate move, but then b takes c3 and there is no perfect continuation. But there is knight f2 check, and that is much more better. So knight f2 check, king to e1 because everything else is controlled. And now is a very important point in the entire game. Which check do we actually do? So coming back here, knight c3 and knight f2 are the only two moves. But if we had analyzed the position earlier, I said that we have to check the white king with the knight, but not on these two squares. So the other square in the L shape, if we go to the basic, is e3. That means we have to reroute the knight to e3 somehow. So what can be the probable path? Knight to f2. Okay, we go with knight to f2, king to e1, and now what? How to reroute the knight to e3? So probably knight d1, but then the king will take it because it will be a check to the king. Knight captures on h1. Yeah, it is a good move, but then simply king d1 and you don't have a future. So Is knight to g4 a candidate move here? Of course it is. And knight g4 check. And now queen h4 is more or less forced. Because if not queen h4, then the problem is after king to d1, now comes knight to e3 with a checkmate. If king d1, then knight e3 is a simple checkmate. So queen captures on h4, and now simple queen captures on h4. And yeah, you just attack the king. Now the job that the bishop was doing is now fulfilled by the queen, and now queen is controlling the e1 square, the bishop is controlling the entire diagonal. So now the final plan, knight captures on e3 with the checkmate. And this is how we just execute our plan in the best way possible. So again, coming back, coordination of pieces is really important when solving puzzles with minor pieces, because we saw that okay, the two bishops are coordinated, the knight was also well coordinated but not at the best possible position. So we played knight f2 check, king e1, and now using the discovered check principle, we tried to reroute our knight so that it can capture e3 on the next turn. And after queen captures, of course queen captures, and finally when everything was under control, we just took on e3, and it's a nice little checkmate for the white king. Okay, great. So yeah, let's proceed to the next one. Yeah. So coming to this puzzle, it's very important for us to understand the idea which white is trying to emphasize. It's white to play and win. The black bishop can be taken, and we have to find the best solution for white. So first of all, again, looking for the weakness, we realize, okay, pawn on g7 is weak. Uh, there are two attackers. It can be captured. But before capturing it, we have to, of course, look for the continuation. So what we realize is that yes, we can take the bishop, that opens our rook, but we will be more happy if the bishop is taken when the king is on h8. Okay, so that we can capture the pawn with a check if required. So for that we must try that. Okay, first we go with rook g7 check, king goes to h8, and now the king is on h8, and there is nothing else required for us. Like now if the rook on h1 is moved to h7, it's going to be a checkmate. So what is in between is the h2 pawn. So we just take the bishop on g3. Bishop f5 just guarding it, we just take the bishop, and now anything black plays, d4 is a random move that it actually doesn't matter. Simply rook captures on h7 is checkmate. So again, keeping in mind that not every move of you should be a check or a sacrifice. Like a lot of people, after capturing this pawn, they go with the flow. They feel that, okay, now I've captured a pawn, I'll just go and capture bishop. And it is good, it is not bad. I mean, after rook captures, uh, they go with, let's say after queen captures on f6, they go with something here. And the problem is, again, with rook on g7 is not under at any defense. So let's say what happens is, let's say if you go with, instead of captures, you go with something like bishop captures on c8 or rook captures on h7, try to sacrifice. The problem is the pieces that you're going to use to actually checkmate the black king are not defended well. Like the pawn on f6 can be taken with the queen, and black is ready to sacrifice the material. That is what we have to learn from this. Because queen f6 is one of the candidate moves for black, and we should not give black the time to actually play queen f6. So bishop c8 is good, but it's not the best. The second thing to keep in mind is that white queen is away from the attack. Like, so a lot of times players try to bring the white queen into attack, however it may be possible. Like after ace takes on g3, just the rook is attacking. They fail to see this. They see, okay, the bishop has to move somewhere else, and then queen h5, queen h7 is a potential idea. And it's not a bad plan, but it's slow. The problem is it's really very slow. H captures on g3 is much faster. You have a rook on h5 ready for attack. We just need to open the rook up and try to attack on h7. So again, analyzing all the plans, there is a plan with bishop captures on c8, but then queen f6 attacking the g7 rook is actually a good position for black. Not winning, but we have to play precisely afterwards. So rather than making a mistake and then playing precisely, it's better to start with the precise variation, which is h captures on g3, bishop f5 just last defense, and bishop captures on f5. d4 is useless, rook captures on h7 is nice checkmate. So I hope this is clear to you guys, and I'm sure that it is a very good example of why sometimes a silent move can also prove very fatal. Just because this is not actually a silent move, it is as good as moving a rook to open file, and we of course do not treat a rook on open file as a silent piece. So after h captures on g3, simple attack on h7, it's more or less game over for black. Now coming to this next puzzle, this is a really very simple puzzle. I mean, it's white to play, the black queen is under attack. So whenever we encounter such cases in our main games or even in puzzle solving, we have to first check if there is not a counter attack for black minor pieces. So for example, in this position, okay, the rook on e1 is hanging, but okay, that's not worth the queen on e7. So we can safely take the queen on e7. So we go with queen captures on e7, bishop captures on e5, and now it's just as good as it. We can just go with queen captures on f8. There's a free rook. It's coming with a check. That is what you have to see before taking it. So queen captures on f8 with a check. King to h7, and now we should not hurry with queen g7 because it's covered. But the best move here is to just eliminate the defender of the g7 square. So simply knight captures on e5, and anything black does at I mean g4 is sorry d4 is just any move in place of this particular last move, and it's queen to g7 checkmate. It's more or less forced. There is no defense against this. So coming back to this main position, it's very obvious. I mean, the queen is hanging. This is the most simplest position that I will be taking in this particular course, but it's very important to understand because in case of a hanging queen, we have to always look for counter plans for our opponent, like the knight, any attacks, possible attacks on f2, the bishop, any attacks on the rook, this bishop, any possible checks. And after taking everything into consideration, we have to then take the queen. And of course, this position is completely uh, winning for white. Any case, and I mean, in the previous variation, bishop captures on e5 was played. Now rook to f7. It doesn't matter. I mean, just queen e8 check, rook back to f8, queen captures on f8, and after this, there is a simple queen g7 checkmate. So that is how this puzzle proceeds. Now, of course, now coming to the next one, it is much of a similar kind. The black queen is under attack. It can be taken with the white queen and the white pawn. And which one should we choose? The problem is if you take with the pawn, we actually close the queen's path to the black kings. That is not what we have to do. So it's better to take with the queen. And of course, it's a check. That is what we have to see. And after king h8, now there is a very nice idea. The first idea is to go pawn to f6, trying to checkmate on the g7 square. And if rook g8, then simple queen h6 checkmate. And the second idea is to go with knight captures on e6. Now, which of them is better? So while evaluating such ideas, like which of the two ideas is better and some of kind, we have to always see which idea brings pieces closer. Now the pawn on f5, pawn to f6 is much simpler idea, but knight capture on e6 is a much more, what you can say, uh, dense idea to spot. And why dense? I'm saying because this idea actually brings a knight which is on d4. It's far away from the king. We are bringing it closer to the king, and we are threatening a mate on g7 with the queen. So knight captures on e6, and rook f7 kinds of defends the mate. But now simple queen captures on g7, and now there is the forced mate on g7. So every time, like, I've seen players going for checks and try to finish up the games with checks, but it's not the case every time. Sometimes just simple moves like queen f7, and anything black plays is going to be the same. Queen g7 is a checkmate, simple way. So it's not always the complicated positions that prove supreme, but sometimes even simpler play can make the opponent resign the game immediately. So yeah, that was one of the puzzles demonstrating how to win the game with just simple concepts of chess, like just bring the pieces closer rather than moving a pawn to and just making the attack slow. Just knight captures on e6. That is what we analyzed here, and queen g7 is more or less inevitable in this position. So yes, I think yeah, this one. This is the next puzzle that I had shortlisted for discussion. But this puzzle is actually a very well-known puzzle of 19. I think I don't know the exact date of this puzzle, but it was analyzed by several intermediate players, and it is a very good puzzle to understand the fact that this queen is out of the play, and it's very easy to understand because now the queen d8 check is one of the prime moves here, and actually the queen itself is self-sufficient to deliver a checkmate. So we start with queen d8 check, king to f7, and now comes queen to e7 with a check. Of course, if you go king back to g8 in this particular thing, then queen e8 is just a simple checkmate. And after king to g6, now it's very easy to understand again the simple concept of chess. Now the knight and queen are already participating in the attack. So the only piece that are not participating is the knight and this bishop. And the rook can also join the attack, but they don't have a chance to join because g3 is covered by the knight. So now you go knight to h4 with the check, but which knight to h4 is a good thing to for us to understand. If we go with this knight to h4, let me just remove all the arrows. If we go with this knight to h4, then king h5, and there are no more checks. I mean, there is queen e8 check and queen g6, queen captures g6 checkmate. But yeah, I mean, that is good way. That is a three move checkmate. So why not go for a two move checkmate? So we go for knight f3 to h4 check. Now comes king to h5, and now simple mate in one, not queen e8, but a simple bishop f3 check. And you know, this is a very good example. I just shortlisted this puzzle because I was sure that queen e8 and the idea is much more easier, but this demonstrates how we can like make every piece count in the attack, like knight h4. Now this knight also has a contribution, and finally the bishop on g2 makes the final move of checkmating the black king, and demonstrates its support towards the entire white attack. So yeah, that was a good example of piece coordination and piece support. Proceeding to the next one, yeah, this is white to play, and this puzzle is winning for white in all aspects except that the pawn on f3 is covering e2 and g2, the bishop is nicely covering, but there is no attack that black has. So in this type of puzzles, when it is a what you can say, two possible move situations, like if you capture with the pawn, you make a new queen, or you capture with the rook, which of them is more forcing? Now, what we have to understand is that if we capture the rook, bishop with the rook, you have rook to f8, and that's not a clear idea for us, because if queen captures on g8, just king captures, and after the rook captures, king captures, d8 queens is not finally an idea because the bishop is guarding the d8 square. So that means that the pawn has to be promoted to the c8 square by making a queen. But like making a queen is not actually the idea behind this puzzle. The idea is to increase the pressure on the g8 square in order for black to compulsorily capture the queen on c8. Like pawn captures bishop with the queen, black is forced to capture, and now the problem is now there are lack of defenders of the back rank. So rook captures on c8 with a check, bishop d8, everything that black puts in between the king and the rook is going to get captured. This is the final checkmate. This queen had only role to play and what you can say, lay some pressure over the g8 square, nothing else. I mean, else the entire position is self-sufficient. The pawn takes with the queen. Now you see there are three attacks on the queen. That is why the black queen is forced to actually capture the white queen, which is what black does. And now rook captures rook f8, bishop d8, rook captures rook f8, and simply rook captures on f8 with a checkmate. So again, this is an example of again playing with the simple moves, not complicating the position much. If you go rook captures on c8, rook to f8, and the position is a bit more complicated because a lot of times I've seen players with rating 900,000, 1100 just getting tens in this position. I mean, why to get tens just when you have simple pawn captures on c8 with the bishop? Just put more pressure, just have it, and then just this is a simple background concept that every beginner chess player learns, right? So yeah, this was another interesting puzzle. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, perfect. So very simple puzzle for white to play and win. If we notice this diagonal is completely weak, so we can go queen e5 check. But first of all, what's important is to take three pieces. I mean, the king is safe. That is what we ensure. The three things again. The king is safe, so that is not a point to be considered. The weakness squares, this is particularly weak rook, we can take it first. And the candidate moves. Now, because this rook is weak, the king is safe, taking the rook is the most probable candidate move. And third, the tactic. I mean, yeah, we are attacking the black rook after that. And yeah, we may be taken, but then simply queen h6 check. And that is what happens. Pawn captures, now queen h6 with a check, queen back to h7. And now this rook controls the entire g file. So we have to analyze that, yes, now the king has to be forced to come to the g file by queen to f6 with a check. And now queen g7 is the only move, and queen captures on g7 is knight checkmate. So again, same piece of what you can say, key points that we have to remember in this puzzle too. Pawn captures on f7, the same this very easy candidate move is what is working in this puzzle. You don't need to complicate it more with something like knight to e5 and attack the rook again, or something like queen e5 check. Queen e5 check, it's not actually winning, because after queen e5 check, just rook to g7. And yeah, you have knight captures on f5, but again, the same thing. Why to complicate when we have a simple win with pawn captures on f7? And this is the way you win the game. Queen f6 and queen g7 checkmate. Okay, so I hope this is pretty clear to all of you. Moving on to the next one. This is a very important puzzle to understand the fact that why two rooks in a same file, double rooks as we call, is much stronger. Now, if you see, king f7 is the only escape square, but now after queen c8 check, king f7, the fact is the rook is now cut off from the defense of the bishop. So now simply rook captures on g7, king to e6, and it's a very easy mating to be analyzed. Now, to analyze this mate in 2, we have to first take into consideration that which rook to check with on g6. If you check with the g1 rook, just removing the arrows, if you check with the g1 rook to g6, then the problem is king to f5, and now there is no checkmate in 2 moves, right? So you have to, if you have to checkmate the earliest, you have to find rook to g7 to g6 with a check. Now, if king to f5, rook g5 would have been a checkmate, so he was king to f7, and now simple checkmate in 1. I think everybody of you will find it in chat. Yeah, queen g8 check, simple. Queen g8 check, it's a nice checkmate with the queen and the rook, nice coordination, nice triangle formation, and the king has nowhere to go. e7 is covered by one rook. So yeah, this is a very good example of double rooks, and that is why it's one of the most basic concepts in chess, that we have to double the rooks whenever possible, because two rooks in a row are very difficult to handle. And although the rook on e7 was defending the bishop, so even now the rook could have taken the bishop, but we do it in style. I mean, the king has only one escape square, that is the square in between the rook and the bishop. So we just force the king to come to f7, and simply rook captures on g7 with the check. King e6, now comes rook g6 with a check, and now simply queen g8 with checkmate. So yeah, this is one more of a simple puzzle uh, where we can see the power of two rooks in a row. Again, the plan was pretty same, the three-step plan that we had. This was, again, identify the weakness. The king is weak, the bishop is weak, so we first attack the king, make the king move in the way of the rook and the bishop, and then we attack the bishop, the second weakness, and finally is to spot the tactic of rook g6 and queen to g8 with nice checkmate. So I hope this is clear to all. Let's move on to the next puzzle.